Good afternoon, everybody. Let's get this going. Okay, so is everything clear there? All right. Okay, so I'm going to just talk to you about item analysis today in terms of what I have done in the library, and then Jonathan will show you the practical part in the Blackboard. But we thought that it's important just to underline the theory of item analysis a little bit, and hopefully it won't be too technical or too much. But I think it's important to have that understanding as to what does this actually mean and what will you get out of it when you do it, and how would it help your students at the end. So the question really is, why would we want to do item analysis in the first place? And it's to make sure that, how do you know your assessment is valid and reliable? How do you know it's a good assessment that you have and that your students are doing? So item analysis help us to show us red flags for certain questions that might come up that you might not think about at all when you set your test or when your students do your test. And of course, item analysis is when you have a test that you want to continue using going forward from group to group, because that is the idea, is to see how did students answer this, what problems was there, improve your test, and then your next group does it, and so you go on, and it's a continuous improvement of this assessment. Sometimes you will just take questions completely out and replace it with new ones, or you will adapt the question and write a little bit differently, and so on. So that is the one thing. It helps you to identify problematic areas and to improve your question. So this was a study that I did with data that I collected in 2013. But I thought I'll use this because we do item analysis every 2 to 3 years. What we have is we have a certificate of information literacy that we offer to all first-year students in the university. I'm sure many of you have heard about it, or especially your communication lecturers in your different faculties will use it. And there's a standard one of the assessments is a standard multiple choice assessment, and it is a bank of 100 questions. So we literally, students across all faculties do this assessment. And it was important for me to know whether this assessment is valid and reliable. So in 2013, we had the first year that we had this short course like this, we had 2,700 students doing it. And out of them, 71% actually completed the online assessment. So we excluded the Afrikaans test because we have the test in Wellington and Afrikaans, because you can't compare item analysis across a language. You can do it within a language, and you can look at that because it is about how your question is written, how students understand it. And in the English version, they might be completely confused as what you are asking, but in Afrikaans it might be very well written, or the other way around. So you can't mix languages if you have a test in more than one language. And so at the end, our final total population was that we did, the data that I had was 1,317 students. Now, what's important to know here is that the theory says that if you do item analysis with a very small group of students, under 40, it's not really recommended. Of course, the data could be still important for you and you can have a look at it, but he's saying that if it's under 40, your results might be influenced by the small size of the group. So that I think it depends on how many students you have as well in your class. So just maybe noted that under 40 could be a problem. So in the Blackboard version, there are 2 tests that's being done for you basically, but because our data sat across over 80 subjects probably, and I couldn't pull item analysis reports from Blackboard. I had to pull all the data from everywhere, then put it all in one massive spreadsheet and use a statistician to help me with these tests. So that's how I approached it from our side, because we couldn't do it. But for you, the Blackboard version is perfect because it's in your subject already. You just get that report and you immediately get it. So we did 4 tests, which is those 4, and I'm just going to go briefly into each one of them to explain to you what each of them are doing. But I always acknowledge Corey Ace, who's the statistician here at CPUT, because she really helped me a lot with all of this. So the first one is called the Item Difficulty Index, and this is one that's available on Blackboard. And all it does is basically just look at the percentage of students who answered that particular question correct or not correct. So how many got it right in your class and how many got it wrong in your class. That per question, you get that. And there's a criteria that is applied. I'm not sure the criteria how Blackboard decides on this, but what it happens is if you have a question and you have up to 3 possible answers, we use the criteria that the range should be between 20 and 80%. So if 20%, if 85% got that question correct, it would mean, or it could possibly mean it's too easy. Okay? If less than 20% got it right, it might mean that it is too difficult. But there are other things to consider. It might just be that the question could be confusing. And we'll speak a little bit later about that. So the range that we use is 20 to 80% for questions with up to 3 answers. If it's 4 or more answers, the range changes then to 35 and 85%. And if it's a true or false question, it has a different criteria of between 60 and 95%. So we want to keep it between that. So the moment it goes either below it or higher than that, it raises a red flag. And now it means I will go and I can go and look at that questions to see why is that so? What could be the possible reason? So item difficulty index is called in Blackboard difficulty, and you will see it there. The ranges that it uses there might be difficult. Slightly different, but I mean it doesn't really matter. You don't have to go and change it, but this is how we approach that. So in our test, out of the 100 questions, we had so those 3 in the middle ones are the different categories. So we had 23 that fell into the category with 3 answers, 74 in the category of 4 and more answers, and 3 that fell was true or false. So out of all of that, out of this 100 question, 25 questions was rejected. Based on that, it was the first time we did the item analysis, and 75 was accepted. But I also want to say that this is only one of the 4 questions. You have to, we did all of them, and only then looked at a question and across all 4 of the tests. Okay, so because that, if you change something here, this might completely change. So it's just to be aware of that, but I'll show you that a little bit later. So immediately 25 of our questions were rejected, and I had to go back to each one at that point and see why was that. That was the one test where it looked at how many got it right, how many got it wrong. The next one is the discrimination index. And what this does is, it sounds very technical, and I was glad that I had a statistician to help me, but it indicates the extent to which each question contributes to the total test. So what it does, it takes the 25% top students' marks and the bottom 25% students' marks, and in each group it identifies a percentage who answers it correctly and subtract the bottom group from the top group. But at the end of the day, your discrimination index should be equal or more than 20%. The moment it drops below 20% for the discrimination index, it raises again a red flag, and then you go and you look what could be the reason. So it basically, this one just means that it looks at how does this question contributes to your full test. If that makes sense. I do have an article on this for anybody who would like to go and read the full theory around all of it. So for our test of the data of 2013, 11 of the questions were rejected at that time out of the 100 questions. So 11 were rejected, and the flags were raised. The third test is the item to total correlation. So in Blackboard you have that test as well, and it's called the discrimination one. This is the other one that is in Blackboard. And what it does here is it indicates that each student has a score for a question. Either they passed that question or they failed that question, as well as a total score for their test. And it does a correlation between those two. And so the criteria for that, if it is under or equal, under 0.20, anything under 0.20 is rejected. And in our test, 9 of those questions were rejected. So that is the item to total correlation. This for me is an extremely interesting one, and I don't think this one is covered in Blackboard. It is the distribution of answers to alternatives. And what this is, the percentage of students who selected the various alternative answers, for example, A, B, C, D, E, those alternatives that they must choose from, And it computes and determines the distracting ability of those alternatives. But in other words, what it is saying is, okay, this question has 4 possible answers that the students must select from. Which ones did they choose and how many chose those ones? And if any of those possible answers that you give, if less than 5% of students chooses one of them, it means it doesn't have a distracting ability. So it's either obviously not the answer. It's an obvious answer, and then you don't want that as an option in your as a possibility. Then rather remove it or replace it with something else. And so anything less, if there's any one of those where students answer or choose it less than 5%, then it doesn't have a distracting ability. So it's the distribution of answers to the alternatives. This was our biggest weakness in our test, because sometimes you run out of possible options to put down there that is maybe plausible, and so you have to really try and think how to do this. So 51 questions had one or more possible alternative that was selected by less than 5% of the students. 51 of our 100 questions then had that. And that was the biggest weakness in our test. And the moment that you improve this here, your other test can possibly now change. Because if you remove something here, it can have an effect going to the other side as well. So this is how, just as an example of, or a part of our data sheet. So you'll see all the question numbers here on the side, up to 18, but there were 100 of those. Then you see the different tests, the IDI, the DI, the ITT, and then the distribution of answers at the end. So now here, what we show is the one that I've just spoken about. The most we had was up to E, okay, possible answers. So for each question 1 had 3 possible answers. If you look here at question 4, there was one that had a 3.20%, and we say less than 5% means it's not a good distracting ability as a possible answer. So I had this whole sheet, and so now all my things that had, I highlighted all the things like there and there and there that did not fall within the criteria, fell outside of the criteria. And so now I can go and have a look, and I can say for this one particular, let me just see if I have that here. Okay, now let me just go back. I will look at that now. So I could look and see, okay, this question had actually failed 3 tests. Okay, so now I go to that question and I go see what can it be. So one example here, for instance, this is one example that I want to share. So this question, original question 54, failed basically all the criteria, failed all the tests. But the worst was that the 4th test there, where we look at the different possible options, the answer was D, and less than 5% chose that. So that showed to me, wow, the actual correct answer was chosen by less than 5% of the students. Why on earth would that be? So then I went and I read the question, and then I discovered that it wasn't a clear question. So it said here, and this was testing referencing, for instance, when the names of 2 authors are mentioned in a source, example, according to Petzel and Riddle, how should your in-text be done? Now we all know when the authors are mentioned in the sentence, you just add in brackets 2006 and the page number, for instance. You don't mention the authors again in the brackets because it's in your sentence. It depends on how. So I realized that the students were confused by this and they didn't understand what I was asking them. So I revised the question and I did this. I said, when the names of 2 authors are mentioned in a source and the sentence in your essay starts with, according to Petzel and Riddle, okay, so now I'm busy analyzing the new version of this test after this, so I can't tell you what the test was in terms of the change. But this is what I picked up, and I wouldn't have known this if I didn't do item analysis. This is just one example of the question. So another example was this one, question 75. It basically also failed on 2 of the tests. What is the anti-plagiarism software used by CPUT lecturers to detect plagiarism? Now in 2013 we only had SafeAssign. We had Turnitin, then we lost Turnitin, then we got it back again for postgraduate students and so on. So I think the students were confused and they didn't know what we were talking about, and then they would at the time when they started answering it, we actually 2 of those were correct answers, and not just safe assign. Turnitin was also a correct answer. So then we revised it and said, what are the anti-plagiarism software programs used by CPT lecturers? Because we want them to know that CPT lecturers use anti-plagiarism software, because this is part of the things that we teach them. And so we grouped it together like that, so Turnitin and Safe Assign, or Blackboard and Mendeley, or whatever, so that they understand what it is and just know. So again, I'm going to see what the result was on that. So this is nice, is because you start building this history of this question, and how you changed it, and how did the behavior of the students change, and how did they answer it, and so on. So this was just 2 examples, which we wouldn't have known either if it wasn't for item analysis. But I mean, you saw there was way more to go through. So how did we respond to this results? We revised our test and we updated it. I got a group of 5 people who sat around the table with me, because we all work in this with a certificate, and we looked at each of those red flags that came up, and I didn't just apply my own mind to it. I wanted to hear other people's views on it as well, and then we looked at all those questions, and we either decided whether we're throwing the question out completely and replace it with something new, or are we just going to revise it a little bit and word it differently because of what the results were saying. So 23 questions were replaced completely out of the 100. We added 18 images to the test, so that the images included test. We also reduced the test to 60 minutes. It used to be an hour and a half, 90 minutes. And this updated version 3 we rolled out in 2015. So we now have to do a new rollout next year, a version 4. So I have the data, I have the test results and everything. I now just need to go and identify the flags, the red flags, and now go and relook at it again. So just to conclude, the assessment is important, but the instrument should be valid and reliable. And item analysis is a way of saying my test is valid and reliable because I'm checking on that. So this study provided valuable information to improve the assessment for us, and it's something we will continuously doing as we go on, because the new questions that we added in, we don't know how students are going to respond to that. You know, every time you add or change, it might have an effect or it might not, and then we can see. So I would like to with this bank of questions, have this complete history going forward of where it was, how it was changed, and so on. And so we're trying to do item analysis every 2 to 3 years. I don't know if you have any questions. Item analysis, this was so amazing actually, was based on an author called Nunnally, who did this in 1972. And I just have to say, what is the chances that we would have a book of this guy of 1972 in our library? But I took a chance and I searched our catalogue, and it was even in the Cape Town campus where I am at. I literally left my office down the steps, and there the book was. I couldn't believe it. But this whole thing of item analysis is actually based on theories that was developed by him those many years ago, and still very valid and reliable today. So yeah, I don't know if you have any questions from your side.